Father George, you mentioned a citation of Mackintosh with an appendix at the end. Can you give me the direct citation again? I missed it.
Well, it's the history of the doctrine of the person of Christ.
Okay.
It's this classic volume that he did, and in the back of the volume there is an appendix on the sinlessness of Christ, which is sinlessness and unfallenness is the same thing. So that was and the argument was, he discusses those who object and say that if he had not taken our sickness and our sinful humanity, how would he know? He doesn't know what sin is all about. And he argues it, and he says actually that the passion of Christ was the greatest of all passions, precisely because he was sinless. So the sinless one, or the righteous one, feels the attack of sin, and by being with us, that's what he suffered every day. Just as the saints are crucified, as Paul says, I'm crucified in the name for Christ's sake all the time. Imagine what the crucifixion of God as man would have been. There was somebody who was telling me that, I think it was Nick, my student, was it you, somebody said that there was an argument with some Jewish person that what did Christ suffer? The suffering of Christ is nothing compared to the Holocaust of Israel. And I said, well, what is the answer to that? It's the suffering of God. What is the greatest crime? To kill the whole humanity or to kill the creator of all humanity? To put to death God. You're not putting there at death a human being. And you were putting there the righteous one who came to destroy death through his righteousness as man, our righteousness, to restore it. So what is the greatest crime? If you don't understand the person of Christ, then you don't understand the significance of the cross and the victory of the cross for the whole humanity and the whole world. But that is precisely what constitutes the church. That is the mighty act of God in the incarnation, in the humiliation of God, of the Creator, and not only going to the cross, to the very end, atonement. We didn't talk about atonement in him. Yes?
You seem to emphasize the mighty act of God theme and hypostasia over and over again. Should we not as much emphasize the hypostasia and the vicarious humanity of Christ as much as the mighty act of God? So often Christus Victor motifs of atonement simply emphasize the mighty act of God. I think both are in Torrance.
Yes, now, anhypostasia and hypostasia, I remember we discussed this many times with Torrance. I wasn't very happy with this, the anhypostasia, because I have written in my own research on Athanasius, and we discussed it up to a point, but we never had a full opportunity to produce to him I sent him all my essays. The mystery of the person of Christ in Athanasius already appears in the De Incarnatione, but nobody has understood it. I remember Maurice Wiles coming to Durham and criticizing the Orthodox and hypostasia and hypostatic, or the hypostatic union of the two natures, saying that this is docetic. All Orthodox is docetic because they don't accept a human person in Christ. So it's unhypostatic, the human anhypostasia. And I got up and said, excuse me, that's not the Orthodox view. Athanasius says that the hypostasis, the divine hypostasis, became also human. So the humanity is hypostatic and hypostatic in the hypostasis of the Son who became human. The hypostasis becomes, the ousia doesn't. That's a very important point. I have in an essay 25 quotations from Athanasius that it was not the ousia but the hypostasis that became egeneto anthropos. That refers to the hypostasis becoming human. And in the 6th Ecumenical Synod, and John of Damascus, also, Maximus the Confessor, Sophronius of Jerusalem, they all speak of a composite hypostasis. In other words, there is a human person. But the human person and the divine, there's not person in the same way as in Nestorius. because there is a short-cutting, short circuit, if you like, of the divine and the human. The divine and the human, the one is uncreated and the other is created. Human hypostasis, we can't use the same word for God and for man, because the uncreated really is. The created is only an adjective to it. It's added to it. Athanasius speaks of synousia, συμμετοχή, methexis. It's all this. We are not actually substantives. Only God is substantive. So what are we? The human person, we can't use the same category for God and for man. So only the Trinity, that's another important aspect of Torrance. It's there. If you explain it to him, what is the anhypostasia? How do we use it? Torrance used it because, you know this Reformed Dogmatics by Heppe? It was in scholastic, the scholastic dogmatics, which was issued by Barth, I think, reprinted by Barth, the Heppe, all these dogmatics. There are Reformed theologians who are very scholastic in that sense. And this is why they criticize Barth and Torrance. But it was there in the Reformed tradition that it was unhypostatic. In other words, there was no human hypostasis as Nestorius said it. But there was the divine becoming human. So there was a human. And that's what I told Morris Wiles. And I pointed out to Athanasius. Because then the egeneto sarx, what does it mean, the egeneto? It isn't the divine being that became human. Then we have a conversion of the human being, that's monophysitism. This is actually kenotic Christology, which is condemned by Athanasius in his letter to Epictetus. What hell, he says, vomited such a doctrine to say, he has this, what hell vomited such a view that the divine became sinews and bones and flesh? Right? Became that the divine ousia, divine being. It isn't a divine being. So what became flesh? It wasn't the person that became flesh. It became a human person by taking humanity. St. Cyril of Alexandria, in his 5 tomes against Nestorius, says, we don't know when the ensouling of the embryo takes place. There are 3 views, he says to him. I think it's 2nd volume, that the ensouling is done immediately as the fertilization of the embryo, or it is done on the 9th day, or it is done certainly on the 40th day. Then you have a complete human being inside the womb of the mother. That's why abortion is a crime. And all the canons of the early church are against abortion, because it's interfering with the creation of God, of a human being. The human being is already formed on the 40th day. The same happens when somebody dies in the old tradition. We keep prayers. When somebody dies, immediately the priest goes and says the first prayers. Then on the 9th day, and then on the 40th day, because that's recreation in the new condition in heaven. It's entering into life and entering into the other life. These are coordinated in an amazing way. So Cyril says, it doesn't matter when it is the 1st or the 1st day or the 9th or the 4th. The point is this, that before this soul became a hypostasis, he put his hypostasis in there, and he became the hypostasis. So he became man. That's the hypostatic union. Now this kind of refined use of terms, I don't think Torrance entered into this. But then, of course, he emphasized the doctrine of the hypostatic union. He said anhypostasia against Nestorius, because then you have 2 sons, and the doctrine of the 2 sons was condemned by the Ecumenical Council, by Cyril. But he didn't go deeper into some of these things. He did go into many things. But you can't expect everything from Tom Torrance. The fact that he went all the way he went and where he went is just unbelievable. And how he was in dialogue with so many, like Barth. I mean, Barth is another amazing phenomenon, an extraordinary phenomenon, recognized by the Orthodox as the greatest theologian and Pope, the Pope Paul. I remember I was in Princeton when this happened. You remember this little book, Ad Luminam Apostolorum? You could have done the same with Torrance. Many Roman Catholics acknowledge Torrance in the same way as Barth. So the Pope Paul VI, who lifted the anathemas with the East, and these are important things, with the Athenagoras of Constantinople, and opened the way of more dialogue and rapprochement. He invited Barth to go to Rome. This is a little book, Ad Luminam Apostolorum, in the light of the apostles. So imagine the Pope inviting him, a theologian, a Reformed Protestant theologian, right? So he said to him, I will come, but with one condition. This is all in the little book. Barth said, I will come, but on one condition, that you will answer my questions. I'm going to come with questions. And the other one said, yes, I promise, I'll answer all your questions, but on one condition, that you will not publish them. Now, he went, and then they made a statement afterwards, both of them. Then Barth said, okay, but we'll make a common statement afterwards. So people will say, what did they discuss? They put questions. What questions did Barth put? Nothing. I'll publish the questions, no answers, but a common statement. What you thought of me and what I thought of you, and your answers. Okay? And this was done. And you know what Paul VI said? That Barth was the greatest theologian that the church has known since, and greater than since Thomas Aquinas, and greater than him. That's in Ad Luminam Apostolorum. I would say this of Torrance. Yes.
I wanted to change the subject.
Please.
Okay. You said earlier that you thought the ecumenical movement might have been different if it had followed Torrance and Florovsky.
Yes.
Would you say more about that?
Yes. You see, both of them spoke about the Magnalia Dei, the magnificent acts of God. That's a phrase that Florovsky used a lot. The mighty acts of God, Torrance says. In other words, the mystery of the Incarnation, the mystery of Pentecost, the mystery of the revelation of the church, the apostles, and the mission of the church, the conversion of the empire, the Roman Empire, and the triumph of the church over paganism. All these things reveal the act of God with us. And those who are faithful to this act, these fathers like Athanasius and the others, they manifested the unity of the church on the basis of what the grace of God and the act of God. Now, he discusses these points in this long essay, both Torrance and Florovsky. Florovsky says that the church has no limits, for instance. Now, every other Orthodox would say, yes, there are limits, because outside the church there is heresy and schism. So you have the body of Christ, the church, the Catholic Church, and the canons of the church and the canons of the councils define. He said, no, they don't define. Florovsky said that the canons define heresy. Where is the boundary between what is wrong and what is right? But they don't define the church. Nothing defines the church, because the church is the body of Christ, includes God himself, the mystery of the Incarnation, the Holy Spirit. How could you? If we had this kind of essential, the essence of the church, the essence of the church, are not the canons, are not the apostolic succession in ministry, both discuss. In other words, all the things that are constitutive of the Roman Catholic Church, like the papacy, for instance. And this is where Torrance puts grace against papacy. Because the papacy limits the grace of God to one person, through whom it comes to the whole world. But then what about those who are not united with Rome? These are the questions. So what is essential in ecclesiology, which actually is acknowledged by all, but is obscured by the way it was domesticated in their own time, space, culture, etc. That's what he says. That's why I think this is an amazing understanding of history and the act of God, that we're not deprived. No one is deprived. You can't say there are no limits. Where is the church? That's the point. Is it canonicity understood in terms of canons and law? Torrance did a lot of work on law, natural law, and casuistic law. That's another very important, I don't know if you know this little book that he did on natural law and the law of lawyers. that we have, juridical law. They are very different things. The one is order, natural order, the logic of nature. The other is law which prohibits error, but doesn't actually define nature at all, or doesn't specify the way nature works. So it's this kind of natural rationality. Athanasius, I remember Torrance, took me some time before I understood what he meant, that we have to think kataphusein, he was saying, kataphusein. Now, the pronunciation of the Greek, kataphysin, according to nature, because kataphusein is according to katalithiain. And I was saying, what is this word? The pronunciation just didn't click that these were two phrases. What is according to nature is according to the truth. The very word truth in Greek, aletheia, means what you must not forget. It doesn't define anything. So in Greek terms, patristic terms, is apophatic and cataphatic. You don't know, and that Torrance brought it out, I remember in a seminar, it is all said that he was doing incarnation, Christology, soteriology, his major topics, and seminars on Hilary, Athanasius, and the Cappadocians. Now, on the Hilary, I went to the Hilary seminar, which was based on the Latin text. And Hilary is known as the Athanasius of the West, because he did parallel works as Athanasius. So I remember all the epistemological distinctions that he had in Athanasius, he found them in him. He had made me the secretary to keep, and I have my notes from then. I was writing notes, and they were distributed afterwards. And it was, what is according to nature is according to truth. And the nature of things is open-ended, so the truth is open-ended, so you can't define the truth. So then, how do you appropriate the truth? The distinction which was in Athanasius, in Cyril, in the Cappadocians, in classical theology. You don't know what God is, but you know that he is. What God is a definition, if you define God. And that is the problem of the Arians. They were defining what God is. For instance, Eunomius, the extreme Arian, said that God is agenitos, ingenerate. The Son is a Son generated, so he can't be God. But then God's ousia is not his agenisia, is not his ingeneratedness, right? We don't know what God is. But then how do we know? We know that he is. So we have indicative statements that he is, and we have descriptive statements which are apophatic. We don't know. And that applies not only to God, whatever is natural. We can't reproduce nature. We can't reproduce a human being. If we didn't have a body, then we couldn't do even cloning. We can't produce something out of nothing. Whatever we produce is a byproduct of what has been produced by God. So we cannot delineate the essence of things, whatever claims we may make. And this is the foolishness of modern science, that they think, would they create something out of nothing? They can only say that God created all things from that little thing, but that must have pre-existed. There isn't much difference between the Greeks, who said that there was pre-existence matter, and God is only the one who gave shape and form to it. Plato said this. But the theologian of the Greeks was rejected by Athanasius. He called him the theologian of the Greeks, because he believed in a logos that shaped things in the world, the demiurge. But a demiurge was the designer of pre-existing substance, whereas the doctrine from creatio ex nihilo, out of nothing, is the real doctrine, right? These are the points that both Torrance and Florovsky, who are very well versed in the true language of theology, the open-ended language, which doesn't define and close things and therefore divides. And these are the divisions of Christians. Confessions that divided, the different confessions that divided one group of Christians from others, must be done in the reverse. And actually, in some way it has happened, because all the historic documents of the Reformation now are historic documents. They are not dogmatic documents. Those who keep to them, they are divided further. If not in reality to create another church. I mean, the Westminster Confession, and Orthodox produce confessions to respond to the Reformed confessions. But these confessions are not actually confessions because they are confessions trying to define things. That's the wrong way of doing theology, which divides. Yes?
Thank you. And just on that ecclesiological theme, I just enjoy hearing, I know the time is limited, but based on your appreciation of the legacy of both Filodowski and Torrance, where do you see the ecumenical movement today? And
We've lost it at the moment.
So
that's why we need such theologians. I hope that this group will resurrect Torrance, and the other group will resurrect Filodowski, and we need other people. So there are other people like him.
But to push you to be a prophet, what if we were to have in our midst more people like Filodowski and Torrance? How in practical terms could you see a convergence occurring between the churches that would be faithful to the insights of these
Our dialogues are not real dialogues anymore. We talk for talking so that people will say, the Christians are not fighting each other, they are talking to each other. But we all stick to we don't have this agony that this mission, that the church is one, and what are we doing? I remember Ronald Walls, he was telling me, George, I had, when I was a student, and for the first time, I was seeing the variety of Protestantism and all the other churches, because I knew them only from books, so to speak, in Greece. And in Edinburgh, every Sunday, I went to another church. So I was going just to see. I went to all kinds of churches, and I wrote my impressions to my mother. So I have about 2,000 pages of descriptions of and Tom Torrance, I was talking to him about this. I went to this church, the Holy Corner in Edinburgh, with 4 different denominations. I remember when I was a student, people would avoid crossing and passing in front of the other church, the other denomination, so they would go all the way around, and they would never even look at the other side. Now, if you go today, I don't know what today, the last time I was there in Scotland, all the elders and the officers of the churches were out to invite people to come in because nobody would go in. Now, this is the ecumenical dialogue. We are doing dialogue. I wrote to the Patriarch. You're going to put on the internet. I wrote to the Patriarch of Jerusalem, who asked me to be involved because he thinks, he was my student a long time ago, and he thinks that I should represent Jerusalem. I do. We started a dialogue with the Anglicans. We're not doing dialogue because I see the whole direction. We're not excited with it. We're not urgent about it. We have no agony about it. We are not discussing about the union anymore. It's an academic thing. It's failed. I went to Faith and Order twice, and most people go for the ride. It's nice to go to Malaysia, to go there. It's sightseeing and talking about this, that, and the others. You read the text and you say, now where are we here? I have a statement of Torrance. I was trying to find it, I couldn't find it. And another of Filodowski, who are completely bewildered with the ecumenical movement. They started with tremendous hope and force, and then in the end, they abandoned it because it all became political, it lost its movement. It's the same thing that happened. It became a super church, imposing on the churches. And one after another, the churches rejected it and lost interest in it. So what is the way forward? I think we should go back and read these people, study them, recover and rediscover. Without this, there are no scientific revolutions, as Torrance said. Scientific revolutions happened. If you read what he says about Einstein and others, you just go to the sources. Filodowski said, read the sources. Who reads? I know my students don't read sources, don't read fathers, don't read texts, don't even read textbooks. They want to pass the exam, and now that we have internet, just go into Google, find a few answers there. You produce a paper, you passed. You don't care if you get an A or you get whatever. You want to get the degree and get the job, and that's it. What kind of job is this? And what kind of profession is this? there is no passion, real understanding of the Lord, because the passion is not there. The real experience is not there. This is what differentiated Torrance from many others. I'll tell you one thing, and that might be, although I had said what I want to say, is the last word here. I remember the definition of theology by John McIntyre. I asked John McIntyre when I applied for my lectureship, I went and asked him for a reference. He said, he called me John because he didn't remember the names. He was John. Every student who went to him was John. So he said, "Hi, John, what can I do for you?" I said, "I need a recommendation. I'm applying for a job." "From me?" He said. I said, "Yes, you're my professor, aren't you?" "Yes." "Did you get one from Tom Torrance?" He said. I said, "Yes, but I need one from you too." "Okay," he said, "I'll give it to you." I said, "Wasn't I a good student?" "Yes." "I just said what you said. Now, whether I agreed or disagreed, that's another matter." "I know," he said, "that I didn't agree." Now, you know what his definition of theology was? That's a perfect definition of the academic, most academics. And he was a perfect academic. Theology, don't worry about it. He said, don't get excited. Theology is talking, dots, God. In other words, what did he say? What did he say? Well, now, you know what Bart said, what this one said, what the other one said. This is talking about ideas. Florovsky said, ideas do not exist, do not float in history. Existential theology, the real existence. Realism of and existentialism of Kierkegaard. I remember Kierkegaard. Kierkegaard of Torrance is a very different Kierkegaard from the liberals, for the existentialists. Huge difference of interpretation. A young professor in Thessaloniki who does patristics, and I was there as an external assessor. According to the new laws in Greece, there must be a professor from abroad to be the, on the panel for his promotion. Now, he's written a book, a very interesting book, Interpretation and Misinterpretation of the Fathers of the Church. He's a patristics professor, and he has taken cases all the way to the fall of Constantinople, every century. A very interesting book, which I'm translating. Actually, it should be out soon because he needs it. Part of his promotion is to produce this book in English. So I'm doing this to help him. It will be acknowledged that it is worth publishing abroad something of his works. And that's a fascinating thing. This is what theology is today. But we don't have interpreters. We have misinterpreters all the time. So if it is misinterpretation, then we're not getting anywhere. Okay, now, how did I want to finish? There's only one little thing. F. Torrance, what a person. Truly great. Athanasius the Great, Torrance the Great. His lectures were to me, and I mean that, was like an Orthodox liturgy. That's what differed from when he went to on the pedestal there. You thought that the liturgy is going to start. He was passionate. He gave his soul, everything in it. Not the other professors. They were distant. I mean, theology was distant things. The podium was both like a pulpit, even like an altar. He was Reformed. He used the word, but the word, he used it really. Right? That is the best of the Reformed. He used the word in the fullness of the... But he linked it with Athanasius. He linked it with... This is the whole point. The word. Many of his judgments were axioms to me. Most powerful and most humble. And I have two examples. I mentioned the one, the memoranda that we did. Oh yes, the memoranda. When he did the dialogue, and I'll finish. I'm sorry. When I'm not as good as Tom on this. When he was ready to go to Constantinople with 4 Reformed theologians to ask for a dialogue, he was president of the Académie Internationale des Sciences Religieuses, you probably know from his. And I had been elected, not only a member, but vice president. So he came to my room and said, George, I need you for something very serious. Sit down. Where do we go? To my room or your room? I said, go to my room. He gave me a memorandum that he was going to present to the Ecumenical Patriarch in Constantinople, a proposal to start a dialogue. So it was all about starting with the creed, the common faith, and see what you understand by it, what we understand, according to the fathers. He said, you like it? But he had some points there which were disagreeable points. So he said, he started, read it. I read it. He said, what do you think? I said, I want criticism, he said. Really? Yes. Straight? Yes. Straight. It's all wrong. You should have seen. It's all wrong, Professor. Why? I said, now, you will listen. As I listened, read it all, now you will listen to me going through it all. I said, you don't go there to a church. Why do you go to the dialogue? You say who you are. You say, what are the common things? And you say, what is your intention? You're not going to tell the Patriarch that Basil is wrong and Gregory and Athanasius are right. Your Basil is Zizioulas' Basil, is not Basil. Is not Basil. So, and many other things. He said, but you know, I know what you mean, but you don't go straight to ask for a dialogue and you start something which is passionate for you, you just go as a reformed theologian. And you say, we have the Bible, we have sacraments, we have synods, we have this, we have that. We are like you in many respects. How can we get closer together and understand one another? We believe that the church is one and that we must manifest the same faith. When I told him all this, he said, you just present your credentials, I said to him. And why? And ask for, and you recognize his credentials, and you see your credentials, and that's how you ask. And then you produce the other one. You write it for me. I said, I write it for you? Yes, you write it for me. I said, but there are 4 theologians. It was McCord, it was Jan from Czechoslovakia, 4 great Reformed theologians at the time, somebody from anyhow, you write it. I'll persuade them that this is ours, that I did it. I wrote this. So he went, and he phoned me back and said, George, he said, I went. The dialogue is starting, and I asked for you to be there. And then he said, you know what happened? I said, what? I gave both memoranda, mine and his. And the Patriarch liked both, he said. I said, well, this is Torrance. But then he went to the meeting, the plenary, and he said, up to this point, I was the professor of Father Dragas. Now he is mine, he said. I was his teacher, now he's become my teacher. So I said, no, you will always be my teacher. And I would never accept this. And that's the case. I think the man was too big, too amazing. And we have to learn about him and his theology. If we recover this passion and this theology and that amazing synthesis of these great men, then I think the Spirit of God will help us to do the next step, which was the question, where do we go from here? We take a thing at a time. We have to work hard. He worked hard all his life. Now he is being resurrected. All the prophets are not acceptable when they're alive, only afterwards. And that's Tom Torrance. And I hope he will be, and this fellowship will bring him up for all the wonderful things that the Lord did through him in his life. And I know that there are many people around who will join and many Orthodox. I'm going to become the ambassador to Orthodox students of his. Thank you.